Are you ready?
Hello, and welcome to the Whole House Podcast, where you can find home, health, and family all in one place. Our team is comprised of moms from different upbringings and backgrounds, and we each have different passions and giftings and strengths. We each represent a different room, and we all make up the whole house. So grab a cup of coffee and join our overly caffeinated ladies here for the Whole House Podcast.
Hi, and welcome to the Whole House. Today it's Kathleen
and Amerey,
and we're going to be talking about children who are adopted or are fostered and capital letter syndromes, because October is National SPD month, so we thought we would go over capital letter syndromes also for adopted and foster children. And just a disclaimer, we are not experts, we are not doctors, we are not psychologists or psychiatrists.
Hey, I took a class.
Yeah, we took some classes, but
I've got the little certificate with a sticker that said I took the class.
I have that too. And I am an Empowered to Connect parent trainer, but that doesn't make me an expert. But over the years of talking to a lot of adoptive and foster families, I've garnered some experience myself from adopting 4 and just from listening to other moms and dads. So we're not sharing some professional advice. Right. We're just sharing some things that we've learned, and hopefully they will help you in your journey as well.
Right. So we wanted to start with talking about something that I think that a lot of people have a hard time coming to grips with, is that most kids who are adopted, I would probably say like 98% of kids who are adopted, have a capital letter syndrome. Some have very extreme capital letter syndromes or more severe cases of capital letter syndrome. Some have less severe and quieter capital letter syndromes, but most children typically have a capital letter syndrome.
And you're right. That is a really difficult thing to come to grips with, because I've had a lot of parents tell me, well, I adopted this little one at birth, so there's nothing. Right. Well,
or you think that you take that child out of a bad environment and you put them into a good environment, and you're like, okay, why aren't they thriving now? Because they're surrounded by good things and positive energy and a happy place and warm food and all these things, and they're still acting like they're in that negative place. And so you're confused by that and wondering, why isn't this better environment making them better?
Right, and we often, mom guilt is universal.
Yes.
Whether you have adopted or you're fostering or you have biological children, that mom guilt will really get you, because then you begin to think that you're doing something wrong, that you need to adjust something in the way that you parent, and maybe you do, but it's not your fault.
Right.
You are parenting their past. You're parenting what has happened to them. And just really quick, in case you're listening and you're like, what is a capital letter syndrome?
I was thinking that.
Because we use that. That's a very common term for the whole house.
Right.
But a capital letter syndrome is something like ADD, ADHD, SPD. Right. So you can see why we call them capital letter syndromes.
FAS.
Yeah. Anything on the spectrum.
I was going to say Asperger's,
autism, anything on that spectrum. So
and they call them capital letter syndromes because the name is too long to say all the time. So you use the capital letters.
Yes. So that's why we call them capital letter syndrome. So if you were sitting there scratching your head saying, well, I don't know. I don't even know what a capital letter syndrome is.
My children doesn't use capital letters yet.
We only use lowercase around here.
Yes. Okay, so why don't you tell us why most children who are adopted will have a capital letter syndrome?
Okay, well, I'm going to read you a quote. And this is by Renee Spitz. Even though I don't condone the way that he did his research, which was isolating infants away from their parents. It's really a terrible, terrible experiment that he did.
Don't go and read about it.
Yeah, don't. The videos are they're black and white and they're old, but they're still horrific. Infants deprived of their mothers during the first year of life for more than 5 months deteriorate progressively. They become lethargic, their motility retarded, their weight and growth arrested. Their face becomes vacuous. Their activity is restricted to atypical, bizarre finger movements. They are unable to sit, stand, walk, or talk. I know, it's awful. And I know I've always asked my kids permission, like, can I tell your story? And my kids always say if it's going to help someone else, because I always struggled with that. Now they're adults, they say if it's going to help someone else, then yeah, you can tell my story. So one of ours, when she came home to us, she was 4 and she had a lot of this behavior. Like she would be I don't know. I can't even describe it.
She had her own world, but it wasn't like a 4-year-old pretending world. It was like she literally didn't exist in this reality.
Right. It was that vacuous face. Yes. It was, grasping at things that weren't there.
Yeah.
And it was bizarre finger movements.
Yeah. And staring at just vacant and things like that, or laughing at like things that nobody saw or heard, or things like that.
Right.
No, she's not schizophrenic.
No, and she is a very intelligent, well-rounded
mother
adult.
Now.
Mother, yes. She's doing very well, and she's no longer grasping for those invisible bugs.
Yes. So I wanted to talk about, just to give you some examples of, because you might be thinking, okay, well, my adopted child wasn't separated from somebody for 5 months or something like that. Or even, I know they're passed and it's not that bad, or they were maybe in a good foster home before they came to me or something. So I want to give you an example of my biological children and how there are two. We talk about, you might hear us here at the Whole House talk about 2 different traumas, the big T trauma and little T trauma. So little T traumas are little things that maybe happen in everyday life, or
death by paper cuts.
Yeah, death by paper cuts. Small things that that aren't necessarily life altering, but they have an effect on your emotions. And then big T trauma is things like being taken from your mother, or watching somebody die, or being in an orphanage. So those are big T traumas that are very evident and very... So I want to talk about my biological children, my 3 biological children, and their little T traumas, and how I have been, just even in the past week, really thinking about how it has affected them. So right now, my youngest is Glenna, and she's about 13 months old, and everybody is always telling me, which is true, like, oh, she's such a happy baby, she's so sweet, and all of these kind of things, which is very, very true. She's my best sleeper, and all those kind of things. And she's just a happy child. And not to say that my other children weren't happy, but they were a bit more emotional, and, wore their... feeling like their heart on their sleeves and all those kind of things. And so I was thinking about, like, Cecilia is probably my most emotional one. Like, she, drop of a hat, she is crying, she's weeping on the floor. Like yesterday, she was riding, this is a great example. Yesterday, she and Moya were outside and they were riding their bikes and they were running around like crazy. And she had this great idea that she wanted to go down to the trail and ride her bike while we were cooking dinner and all of those things. So we couldn't just pick up and leave and go to the trail.
Right.
Even though she was like full of energy and all of that. And we told her, and she ran in, she's like, let's go to the trail. And she started to put her shoes on and all, because she didn't have her shoes on before.
Right
yeah. And she went and opened the car door, and I had to chase her out there and tell her, we can't go right now. We're making dinner. And after that, now she did cry, but then after that, she was like, I'm too tired to do anything. Like, she was emotionally devastated. She went and laid on her bed and looked at books, even though she was just outside, full of energy, running around like crazy. So that's like Cecilia. And Moira is very quiet and like skeptical of everything.
Yeah, she likes to give everybody the evil eye.
And so I was thinking about my girls and their short lifespan. And when I was pregnant with Cecilia, I, like a lot of first-time moms, didn't know a lot about birthing and all of those kind of things. So I was induced, which not that it's a bad thing. Some women have to be induced, but I was induced when I shouldn't have been induced. And I kind of had a very traumatic hospital experience. Right. And when she was born, she didn't latch well and all of those kind of things, even though I did breastfeed her and things like that. But so now I know that she probably wasn't latching well because of the trauma of her birth, her forced birth, and all of those kind of things. And but then when we got home from the hospital, our house had flooded. And
oh yeah, that's a
it's
big
huge
trauma.
Yeah, we weren't able to stay in our house for like a week, and so we went and we stayed with my mother-in-law, who graciously opened up her home to us and stuff like that. But I was really upset because first of all, I was super emotional from birth. From giving birth, I probably hadn't slept in like more than 24 hours.
Yeah, right. And you were in labor for days.
We were walking
around the neighborhood in the middle of the night.
I know. And so in the car on the way to my mother-in-law's house, I had this major breakdown with my husband in the car. I was weeping and yelling, and she's in the back seat and saying, I don't want to do this. I want to be at my house. I don't want to go and stay at somebody else's house. It's the first week of her life. I wanted to take her home. And then I was like, the whole week that we were there was really emotional and upset. And so those were that was her like little T traumas that I didn't realize that was going to affect her. And she's like the most emotional child ever.
Right. And if you're not familiar with what we're talking about, we did a whole podcast on the 6 risk factors for being a child from a hard place.
Yeah.
And one of them is early medical trauma or a difficult labor or delivery. Yeah. So we often don't think about those. We love modern medicine. Yeah. It's amazing. We're so thankful for it.
And you would rather have your child be induced than die. You'd rather give birth and have a little T trauma than not have a child. So.
Exactly. But we also have to remember that these things do affect our children, and our emotional state while pregnant affects our children, because if our cortisol levels are high when we're pregnant, it's going to cross the placenta. So you think about how that applies to someone who's thinking about giving their baby up.
Yes.
For adoption, which is a wonderful thing, it's still that cortisol level is going to be high, which will cross the placenta and will go into the baby.
Right. So then Moira, kind of similar birthing experience. And then Seth fell down the stairs 2 days after we brought her home and broke his leg, and he was confined to a couch. He couldn't do anything. So like the things that he's wanted to be doing to help me out. So I was stressed with that. I was doing a lot of the, all of the things that mothers with newborns aren't supposed to be doing. And then she went into the hospital with RSV when she was 2 months old. And even though she was there for only like 2 days, I mean, that still was those were her traumas to her. And Glenna is my first baby without any of those little T traumas, honestly. She can't, I remember talking to Seth about it when we were like a month into her being home and stuff. We were like, this has been so smooth. Like, this is crazy.
She just kind of goes with the flow and she's happy.
Yes.
And
so I just wanted to say that because my children are biological, and now Moira does tend to have sensory issues and things like that, but so if you're sitting there and saying, well, that can't be my child because I got her at birth, or I got him when he was a year old, or I know that he was in a happy foster home before this, then you need to reevaluate that, because my children have never left me. Literally, they probably spent 3 nights away from me, and they have those little traumas that have affected their personality and their emotions and their ability to cope and all of those things.
So and that is, it's hard. I understand being a mom of both bio children, and children that have come from a difficult background.
Yeah.
It's really hard because we take it so personally.
Yes.
And that's what you have to get over. I understand, because it was really hard for me to get over. And I think sometimes it's harder for guys to get over because they don't want to label. And the truth is, we're not trying to label kids. That's not the point. The point is, if you know what's going on with your child, then you can better help them move forward to hope and healing. Because if you don't know what's going on and you ignore it and you pretend that it doesn't exist and the behaviors escalate and you're trying to deal with the behavior instead of getting to why they're behaving that way, then you're just going to be stuck in turmoil for the rest of their childhood, and nobody wants to live there. Nobody wants to live there. Believe me, I lived there because I just kind of thought, especially with my youngest, I thought that same thing. Like, he was the youngest, he's fine, he's, he's going to attach, he's going to be acclimated into a home because he was so young.
He's going to cope easier.
And he's the one who had the most struggles. And it kind of blindsided me because I wasn't prepared. And then when I realized what was going on, then I didn't want to accept it. I just wanted it to not exist. I wanted it to go away. So, sometimes, and here's the thing with kids that have come from hard places, sometimes it's difficult to diagnose a capital letter syndrome. Because often these kids come to us with attachment issues already. So if they have attachment issues already, I'll just kind of really quickly go over the attachment cycle. So the attachment cycle is as simple as it is profound. What happens is the child expresses a need, the parent meets the need, and then the cycle is completed. And you do that literally thousands upon thousands upon thousands of times. And so then the child has secure attachment. But when that cycle is broken a lot during the early years of a child's life, then you have breaks in attachment. And so they will give you symptoms, and these symptoms can be a capital letter syndrome, or they can just be a lack of attachment. Yeah. That's why it's very difficult to diagnose. Now, I know in our area, a lot of kids come to us through foster care that are already addicted to drugs and have fetal alcohol syndrome. And then they often get diagnosed with ADD or ADHD, which may be true, may not be true. It's really hard to diagnose. And as far as, being on the spectrum, there is an institutional autism that kids can develop being in either a state home or an orphanage, where all the symptoms of autism are produced. Yes. But it's different.
Right.
Only because it was produced by an environment.
Yes.
And then there's regular Asperger's or autism. And that's why it's so difficult to diagnose these things, because there's so many overlapping symptoms that you just have to keep digging and digging. And it's not because you want your kid to have a t-shirt that says what diagnoses they have. It's because you want to help them.
The best that you can.
The best that you can. Yeah. And so that's why it's so difficult to diagnose these things. And I know that I remember with my youngest, we already knew about the fetal alcohol syndrome. Yeah. And several people had told me, well, then he has ADHD or ADD, because that's very common. Anybody who has, people had told me anybody who has fetal alcohol syndrome has those. Well, then when we did get a psychologist who said that he had Asperger's, she said, but he does not have ADHD. What you're seeing is a processing disorder.
Right. Yeah.
He was not able to process. So when he's looking at you with that blank look, he's not being defiant. He literally can't process what you're saying. Yeah. And so I know you guys probably have a million other stories that are similar to this. Right. And I don't want you to right now just feel hopeless, because you're just well, then forget it. I can't find a diagnosis. Right. Well, finding a diagnosis, we say it's important, but it's not the most important thing.
Right. And I think that something else that's important is that when you look at your child, and say you have a younger child and they are behaving differently than the younger children around them, like maybe having more fits or problems following instructions or things like that. And there are lots of people that are around you that are starting to, maybe they don't understand this situation. They're trying to give you advice and saying that you're disciplining the wrong way, or you should be having him listen like this. Hey, baby. Yes. Can you ask Greg first?
Right, so what Amerey is saying is, like, if other people around you are noticing that it's inhibiting their everyday life. Yeah. In other words, they can't cope or manage in their everyday life.
Right. And then I was going to say that start doing your research and don't just rely on what other people are saying, because some people, most people don't have experience with these kind of things, and don't let them make you feel like you're being a bad mother because you're not doing it certain ways and your child's behaving different ways. You need to be researching and be like, I know we've done many podcasts on being your child's advocate and many live videos about being your child's advocate, and so there's nothing up there. And so just, I guess right now what I was just trying to say is be confident in dealing with other people when it comes to your child. I know that's like a whole nother.
Yeah, but still, that's really important, because you're gonna. Lori and I had said this on another podcast. You know, you're gonna have a lot of people that say you just need to.
Yeah.
Just discipline him more.
Right.
Just be firmer with him. Just this, just that. But you know your child.
Right.
You're the one that is with your child. So you know your child.
Right. And this is another good one where you just said know your child, makes me think of this, is when you were saying it's hard to get a diagnosis, is don't let people make you doubt that your child does have something, because sometimes we sit there and we go back and forth like, he does this, but then he acts normal here, and then does he really have something? And then people
he was fine for me today.
Right. Yeah,
I watched him for an hour, and you just want to say, well, you didn't see him break down when I got home.
Right. And people, they're just trying to make you feel better or something like that. So, and they'll say things like, oh, but I think he's fine. He's just quirky or something like that. Or she just needs to have more calm down. Like, don't make them, don't feel like you're wrong because of they're trying to make you feel better. Just yeah, you can have a snack. Can Uncle Hunter help you find a snack?
Right, that's the thing. It's like you don't back down from trying to find out what's going on with your child because somebody says something to you like, oh, he's fine.
Yes.
Which I heard. And I actually had a psychiatrist who saw me for all of 5 minutes and didn't even really talk to my child, but had her intern talk to my child. And they talked about video games because I was sitting right there. Tell me that there was nothing really wrong with my child except that I was spoiling him.
Oh my goodness.
And that it was all because of me. And
she obviously doesn't know you.
Right. And then threatened my son, who I was trying to get a better, clue of what was going on, threatened my son that if he didn't start listening to me, that she was going to put him on a medication that he wasn't going to like. And I remember walking away from that appointment, and I'm going to cry now, just feeling devastated.
It's okay to cry.
I know it
I'll
is.
hold your hand.
And hopeless, and just really? You're telling me that my child, all of that trauma that happened to him before he came to me, all of that I'm trying to love him through and attach is my fault? That the way that he is behaving right now, or because he can't process information, is all because of me? And so, of course, I'm just going to tell you.
No.
I talked to several people after that who have kids from hard places too, and they were just like, "Really? That's what you got out of that appointment? She's wrong. She's wrong." In fact, when we took our son back to the trauma physician that we were seeing, she was very disappointed. She was very disappointed in me hearing, because she didn't agree with that diagnosis at all.
Yeah.
So
It's
if
ridiculous.
you have someone, a
Sorry.
professional, that's Amerey.
I was trying
Get the paper away from me.
trying to be like quiet, like you know how you take the tablecloth off without
Oh, you can do that?
Yes, I'm so talented, but I wasn't trying to rip it and make a big sound.
So anyway, so if you have a professional tell you that, because professionals are just human beings
Right.
too. They
make mistakes.
They make mistakes, and sometimes they're having a bad day, or sometimes they look at a child and they think, I'm sorry, but this is true. This sometimes happens. Oh, you're from a middle-class family. You have a great home. You have a great life.
Right.
There can't be anything wrong. And that's just not true. That's a myth. Just because you come from a middle-class family, it doesn't matter what your income is. Your income does not affect whether you're going to have a capital letter syndrome or not.
Yep.
That's not what it's about.
Right.
So if you have that myth, like, well, people who have money don't have problems, that's a big myth. That's not true at all. And not that we're upper class or anything like that. We're just regular old people.
Nope, I am not
Regular
upper class.
old people. Regular old problems.
Yes. So you wanted to talk, Mom, about the spiritual side of.
Oh yeah, and like I said, I won't go way too far into it because that's a whole podcast. Like I'm going to do at one point, we'll do a whole podcast on adoption in the church.
Yes.
But when the spirit of the child vacates, there is no attachment. So that quote that I read by Renee Spitz was like, they vacate. The child vacates.
Yeah.
So his spirit is not awake. It's not aware. It's not. So when we bring these kids into our home and we're just like, okay, we're Christians or we're going to church and we love Jesus, and their response to that is not what you want it to be.
Yeah.
It's because they already have a belief system that's embedded in them, and their belief may be, I'm not valuable. I'm not worthwhile.
Right.
People reject me, people leave me, and so they may project that, they often do project that onto God. But, and like I said, I don't want to get into that too much, but what we have to be careful about is because these kids normally have a capital letter syndrome, and we take them into the church family, and they instantly are judged by their behavior. And we have to remember that their behavior is not who they are.
Yes.
They are still valuable, important beings in the body of Christ. And the way to draw them in, you can't assume that a child is in foster care and is part of a family right now, and this family brings them to church. You cannot assume that child has a revelation of the gospel.
Right.
They are going to, and even if they do have a revelation of the gospel and they have a capital letter syndrome, doesn't mean that they are going to be able to sit still. They can't sit still.
Yeah.
Not won't, can't. Or that they're going to be able to absorb the message. We're talking about the processing thing. Like, some of my kids had a really difficult time processing any information.
Yeah.
Because they're...
Especially in public settings.
Right, because they were so
other
full
things
of
around
fear.
Them. Yeah.
And so I just wanted to touch on that point a little bit. We have to be really careful. If we want to be the church that is welcoming and embracing, we need to be prepared and trained and ready for these kids coming home through adoption and foster care to be welcomed into the church and their needs being met in the way that they need to be met, instead of just focusing on the behavior.
Yeah.
So, and if your church is interested in that, then find, Empowered to Connect trainers in your area.
Yeah.
You can find them on their website, and you can just look on the map and find one and connect with them and ask them to come and do some training for you so that your church is prepared for these kiddos. So, what was your...
our last one...
Whipped the paper.
I know. Understanding... Oh, okay. Our closing point. Sorry. We get so caught up in everything that we're saying. We have to write down. Understanding everyone's frustration. and not having a diagnosis and not letting that get in the way of helping their children.
Right, because we did a workshop about thriving with kids with capital letter syndromes at the gathering, and we're not going to release that as a podcast because some people talked about some personal stuff.
Thing, yeah.
So, but that was a really great workshop. But I think that one of the things that we get hung up on is
a common theme at that. Yeah.
It was a common theme. So yeah, go ahead. You were listening, so you had more of a...
The common theme was that I assumed that my child had this, but I kept going places and they weren't giving me a diagnosis, or I couldn't afford to go somewhere to get a diagnosis. So I just sat there and waited and thought, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? Instead of taking that assumption and just running with it and saying, okay, I assume that my child has SPD, which is sensory processing disorder, or I assume that my child is autistic or things like that, and start doing your research and finding out ways to help your kid right away. The big theme was that the diagnosis was what hung them up. It wasn't like they were crippled by that diagnosis, but because they couldn't even get the diagnosis, they didn't know what to do. Right. Or they were waiting. They were stuck in limbo.
I can't do any. It's kind of like, I have celiac disease, and so I could have just been like, I'm pretty sure I have celiac disease, so I could start eating gluten-free and see if I feel any better. But no, it's like, no, I have to wait for that official diagnosis before I cut gluten out of my diet. Right. And so it's the same kind of thought process. Yes. And the truth is, all of the research that I've done on capital letter syndromes and all the families I've talked to, and I won't name any, but there are so many overlapping symptoms and there's so many overlapping treatments. Yeah. You know your child. And the thing is, you should know your child. You need to make sure that you are spending a lot of time with your children. And you should be even keeping a journal, writing down what their triggers are. Figure out, is it sensory? Is it about texture in food? Is it about clothing? Is it about change in schedule? Right. What are their triggers? What sends them into meltdown? Because you can actually start preparing your environment and maintaining a different environment for that child. Yes, it's hard work. But if you want your child to thrive and you want to thrive, like some kids I know in my family, like they had to know exactly what was happening. I think schedule is one of those common things that goes across all of the capital letter syndrome. These kids need to have a set schedule, not just you. And if you're one of those people that likes to fly by the seat of their pants and be like, let's do this right now. Yeah, then I am not one of those people. Me neither. But some people are. And they're just like, they like to adventure and fun. Well, you'll have to adjust for that particular child. Right. Another common theme is these children need to make sure that they have good nutrition every 2 hours. Yes. They need to have food and water every 2 hours. And they may not recognize their own body signals for those things. Oh, yeah. Cecilia cannot recognize those things. I tell her, she'll be in bed, super tired, laying down in bed, it's time to, lights are off, and she's sitting there saying, I'm so hungry. And she just ate. And it's because she can't tell whether her body is telling her, I'm tired, or whether her body is telling her, I'm hungry. And so she just sits there and says, I'm so hungry, and sometimes she'll say it until she goes to sleep. And trust me, I'm not starving my child. She ate 10 minutes ago. Right. But that's a common theme. Yeah. That is a common theme. And one of the other common things is these kids need to move. They need to get out in nature. They need to move. And when I say get out in nature, I don't mean on the soccer field. Not that playing soccer is bad, but they need to get out in nature and go hiking and play in the creek and do those sorts of things. And I know that's difficult for some people who live in the city, but you need to make those arrangements for your child. Go to a trail, things like that. Right. Take a walk in the rain. Right. Yeah, that's a really good thing and I think there's Amerey and I have talked about this before. there are a lot of kids with sensory issues just because
they don't do those things. Yeah.
Right. They don't feel the grass on their feet when they're a toddler.
Right.
We've talked to people who have not even let their kids walk on the grass until
instead
they're
of putting a
4 years
blanket
old.
under your kid, put them down just on the grass and wash their clothes later.
Right. You can always wash their clothes.
Oh no. Okay.
And so, if you are not spending a lot of time with your child because they're in daycare, and Amerey said, Mom, you need to say this. Don't worry.
I did.
About
I'm making her say it.
Don't worry
can
about
get at
stepping
me.
on anybody's toes. Even Dr. Karen Purvis said that when you adopt or you foster, you need to clear your schedule, stay at home with your child for 3 to 6 months, because you need that time of cocooning. You need that time of attachment. And if your child is struggling with something and you think they have a capital letter syndrome,
It's so good.
then you need to do that again
Yes.
and figure out what is going on with this child.
Right.
Somebody else is not going to be able to know your child in the depth and on the level
Right. And
that you do.
And you don't know if your child going back and forth. I mean, now I'm sure there are different instances where maybe your child is just going to their grandparents and they feel super comfortable with them, but you still don't know if even that is triggering them in a way that like Mom's leaving me again, I'm being left again, here I go, she's going to leave again. It doesn't matter how long that you're doing that you are working and you take them to your mom's house and they have been there for 3 years. You don't know if that still makes them anxious or things like that. So you need to be stopping and be thinking of your child. And I want to encourage you. I feel like I kind of want to put this in every time we do a podcast is 2 things. Is one, sacrificing for your child sometimes means this. It means sometimes sacrificing your career, and don't do it with a spirit full of pity for yourself. Do it with that's one of my main points in my gathering thing was sacrificing is supposed to be a joyful thing, and so you do it with joy in your heart that now you get to give up this time to be with your child. And do it. And if you are saying that you can't do it financially, then you should message me, because my husband and I'm not going to cry.
You're allowed to cry.
Yeah, I know. My husband and I do it in a very, very tight financial situation. And if we can do it in a tight financial situation, then I would encourage you
I did it for years.
Yeah, you can do it.
There are financial situations. We were, we had to make sure that our library day and our grocery day and everything was on the same day, because we only had enough gas for that day. And the thing is, Amerey's saying, you can sacrifice with joy. If you need to, think about it as a pivot.
Yes.
Because, if you have a career and you've already invested a lot of time in that career, think of your family as your new career.
Yes.
And pivot. And you put the same time and energy and effort into making your home a wonderful place to be.
Yes.
As you did whatever your career was. And the truth is, I hate to tell you this, but someday your kids are going to grow up and they're going to leave, and that career will still be out there. If you want to go back to it when you're 45 or you're 50 or whatever.
Yes.
So you invest in your children, and do we get off track, or are we still?
No, this is important.
This is a subject.
This is really important too, and that's why I told Kathleen that she just needs to say it, because this is really important to kids with capital letter syndrome. Is being, especially kids who are coming from adopt backgrounds where they weren't connected to, when they weren't attached to anybody.
Right.
Is your attachment to them needs to be constant.
Yes, it needs to be constant and consistent.
And consistent, yes.
And you think of it this way, too, is it's investment parenting.
Yes.
And whether your children are adopted, fostered, or biological, 10 years from now or 15 years from now, however long, when they leave the home, do you want them to still be attached and still be doing things with you and still be integrated into the family on a daily basis. Like, I talk to my girls every day.
Yes.
I do things with my girls all the time, and my boys, I'm always reaching out to them too. You want them to be part of the family forever.
Right.
It's not, there's just this finish line you get to where they're 18. Okay, I'm finished. That's it.
Right.
And you don't want that, because some families do have that.
Yeah.
But you don't want that. You want to be investing.
Right.
And my youngest, I've talked about him. He is so sweet.
Yeah,
He's so
sweet.
amazing. Like, he doesn't live at home anymore. He has a roommate. And he has a full-time job, and he's doing really well. But when he has a day off,
He comes over and spends the whole day with you.
Yes.
He does all the things that you guys love to do, that we loved to do when we were little, like go on bike rides and go see movies.
Yes.
Yes.
And he'll even text me and say, at the very last minute, I have the day off. I'm coming over. We can do something.
Yes.
We could go out to eat, Mom.
Right. And how many, like that. He just wants food.
And that's okay.
But how many kids do that where they have the day off and they want to come and spend it with their mom?
Right. And I love that. That was my goal all along, was for my kids to be part of the forever family.
Yes.
So, any final thoughts? Wrap it up.
I would say don't feel ashamed or discouraged because of capital letter syndromes. Like, kids who have capital letter syndrome thrive in so many ways.
Right.
And you can find
and
you can find so many ways to help them thrive. And so don't let this be a discouragement to you. Let this be an encouragement, because if it's true that your kid has been struggling with the capital letter syndrome, and you're just now thinking about it and wondering whether you should research it or not, and you're feeling super discouraged, if you start working with them, you are going to see so many change. Like, they're going to change in leaps and bounds. They're going to improve in leaps and bounds. And sure, it might take a couple months, but don't feel like you're stuck where you are. Like, this is to be an encouragement, because we know, we have witnessed it personally in our own families and families around us, that helping them in the way that they need help is going to totally change their life.
Right, and the truth is, the diagnosis, even if you don't have one and you still are making some changes, is to teach your kids how to navigate in the world. It's teaching them how to find coping skills and things that they can use all the way into their adulthood.
Yes.
And it can be overwhelming when maybe you have a 5 or 6 year old or 10 or 12 year old, and you're just thinking, I need to get a diagnosis, or I know that something's not quite right with them. The truth is, when that child becomes an adult, when they're 25 or 30, and they're learning these coping skills when they're young, when they're 30, they're going to be using them.
Yes.
And they're not walking around with a t-shirt with a diagnosis on it when they're an adult. And you would not believe how many adults that you see every day or you work around that have a capital letter syndrome.
Yep.
But they've learned how to navigate the world and the way that works best for them.
Yep.
So.
And it's because of their mother's hard work.
That's right. Because of their mother's hard work.
Listen to this and go listen to the Superpowers of Motherhood.
And the Superpowers of Mother Adoption and Foster Care Edition.
Yes.
So thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Sorry it was long. It was good.
It was good. See you next time.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
We're so glad you could join us here for the Whole House podcast. Please subscribe, and if you give us a review, we might pick our favorite and send you a prize. Please remember to like the Whole House Facebook page and follow us on Instagram at @the_whole_house. And please sign up with your email on our website, thewholehouse.org, to be notified when new things are happening here at the Whole House. Thanks so much for listening.